Good morning, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a post round one of the 2025 NFL Draft Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. With me today, of course, is Big Blue Views Tony DelGenio. And Tony, it was a bit of a wild ride last night.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it's kind of funny seeing the Giants be one of the focal points of the entire draft at one end and at the other end. But it was interesting.
Yeah, I said before the draft, I wrote on Wednesday that I thought the Giants would be the most interesting team in the draft, at least the most interesting team in round one. And I absolutely think that that's how it turned out. I said last night, getting Abdul Carter and then trading back to get Jackson Dart without giving up, a 2026 first round pick, without really destroying their entire draft class over the next couple of days, I called it a home run. And I'll explain why a little bit later, but I'm just curious for your reaction to my calling it a home run.
Uh, well, first of all, I was going to say that the Jacksonville Jaguars fans, we probably don't have many of them on the pod right now, might argue with
Oh,
you.
who cares what Jacksonville did? Who cares what Jacksonville did?
I thought that was pretty interesting. Anyway, so my reaction was that briefly, I love the Abdul Carter pick. Clearly, once Travis Hunter was gone, then the Giants, to me, had no choice but to pick Abdul Carter. I did not want them to trade down. I think you get a potentially elite player when you have the chance to get a potentially elite player, and Abdul Carter is all of that. And so I think that the Giants are a defensive tackle now and another boundary cornerback away from possibly being a really fearsome defense. And I just like what they did with that pick, and it was obvious, yes, but it was what they had to do and what they did do. As far as the Jackson Dart pick goes, so I give Shane credit for making the move when he had a chance to make the move. Some people claimed that he could have just sat there and then drafted a quarterback at 34. Dart was not my guy as a quarterback. I think he still has a lot to learn before he convinces people that he can be an effective NFL quarterback. But I give Shane credit for making the move when he felt he had to do it. There's some people who suggested that right after the Giants took Jackson Dart, the Rams traded out of their pick. And there was speculation that the Rams might have been interested in him too. I don't think we'll ever know whether that was true or not. But it does, at least thinking about it, illustrates that when you decide you want a player, especially at a position that important as quarterback, you do have to go get them. And so now really the question that remains is, were they right about which guy?
Absolutely. And see, this is why I called it a home run last night, because leading up to the draft, I had been saying pretty consistently that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll had two goals. They had two things that they needed to accomplish. They needed to get better for 2025, and both for the potential of their own long-term futures, and as the best thing for the organization, they needed to put in place a young quarterback, that the organization could potentially go forward with, as their next franchise guy. And the reason why I called the draft a home run isn't because I can guarantee that Jackson Dart is going to be a top 10 NFL quarterback, but because as we sit here today, Joe Shane hit both of those objectives last night. He absolutely did the right thing by taking Abdul Carter. As he said before the draft, you get a chance to take a blue chip player, you take that player. And most of the speculation was that Brian Daboll had identified Jackson Dart as the quarterback that he wanted in this draft. And Joe Shane went and got that guy. We'll never know if he could have gotten him at 34. We'll never know. But if you say, oh, he could have waited, he could have gotten him at 34, you might be right. We'll never know. But you might also be wrong. And if Joe Shane is sitting here kicking himself because the Los Angeles Rams took Jackson Dart at 26, or the Cleveland Browns moved up and took Jackson Dart at 30 or something like that, if you're sitting there kicking yourself because you missed the quarterback that you wanted, you just can't do that. If he's the guy that you want and the price that you're paying is reasonable, you do it. So I have zero problem with it, and that's not because of the fifth-year option. It's simply because that's the guy they identified that they wanted, and I give Shane credit for reading the board properly and going and getting the guy that he wanted. We can talk, and I'm sure we will, a lot about Jackson Dart and his potential, but as we sit here today, it's a home run because Joe Shane accomplished the objectives that he entered the night with.
Right, right. And I think the important thing about this, and hopefully it's true, I think it's true, is that Jackson Dart was quarterback that Brian Daboll favored. And obviously that's an important thing because he's the one who's going to have to fill in all of the pieces that aren't there yet for Jackson Dart. And so you don't want to thrust a quarterback onto your head coach and effectively your quarterback developer that the guy's not comfortable with. And so assuming that Brian Daboll wanted Jackson Dart, then given his history, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he can develop a quarterback and fill in all the missing pieces.
Quick story, funny story from the media room last night after the Jackson Dart pick. Now, I don't usually go to East Rutherford and work the draft from the media room, but you guys might be able to tell that I'm sitting in a hotel room this morning, getting ready to head back home. But I went last night because I had a feeling that it was going to be an interesting night, that there was going to be a trade back into round one for a quarterback. So we're sitting in the media room last night after the Dart pick, a couple minutes after the Dart pick, and we had and Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are sitting at the dais, and we know Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll gives the media as little information as he possibly can. And, he really, he'll take questions, he gives answers, but he gives you as little as he can. Brian Daboll didn't say last night, Jackson Dart was my guy. He's the one I wanted. But when I really knew that Dart was the guy that Daboll wanted was when Daboll did something last night I've never seen him do. Joe Shane was asked a question, and I don't even remember exactly what the question was, but Joe was asked a question. And before Joe could even open his mouth, it was Daboll who jumped in and answered the question with his assessment of Jackson Dart. And I'm like, okay, Daboll wanted this guy. But I thought for a guy that really doesn't like to talk to the media, he went out of his way to jump in, cut the GM off, and give us his take. And I thought that was telling.
Yeah, and that's obviously an important thing because he's the one who's got to do the work to make him into an NFL quarterback. And you don't, I think a general manager can dictate if he wants to, but I don't think it's a good idea to be dictating to your head coach about the most important player on a team, right? And if your head coach is an offensive guy and you hired him because he's an offensive guy and because he's a quarterback developer, then you really have to go get the guy your head coach wants. And so, yeah,
Absolutely. If you're doing the right thing as a GM, you have to give the head coach, you have to give the coaching staff what they need, what they want to work with, what they think they can work with. It's a long time ago now, but I always thought that that's why at the end of their working relationship, I sort of thought that's why things kind of fell apart between Jerry Reese and Tom Coughlin,
mm-hmm.
because I think there came a point in time where Jerry wanted to push the Giants forward. He wanted, he saw the way offense was changing in the NFL. He wanted to give Tom Coughlin the kinds of players to keep up with that trend. Tom wanted the kind of players that Tom had always coached, and I think there was a discrepancy in the vision between the two guys, and I don't mean to rehash ancient history, but for me, it's just an example of how things can fall apart if your coach and your GM aren't on the same page and you don't give the coach players that he wants to work with.
Right, you're right. They have to be working together, and in this particular case, I'm not sure that it has to apply across the board to every position on the team, but certainly at quarterback, when you've hired a head coach whose resume, let's say, is as a quarterback developer, and that's the probably the number one reason you hired him, then you have to give him the guy that you want.
Absolutely. And, part of this for the Giants is, I had said they had to get a quarterback in this draft and, fairly early. And some people questioned that. And I said, look, part of that is not only for the future of the Giants, but part of that is because of the situation, Joe and Brian are in that if they didn't do it now, maybe they were never going to get a chance to do it. So I think that's part of the swing for Dart as well. You agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think that uh, having not drafted a quarterback since he got here, Joe Shane had to do it, and I didn't think that drafting a quarterback this year meant taking one in round 6. I thought that you had to take one that you had a reasonable expectation of imagining would become the Giants' starting quarterback. I will say this for Joe Shane. We were sitting here a couple of months ago, and the Giants quarterback room was Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito, and now you've got hopefully your starting quarterback of the future. You've got a possible future Hall of Famer to start for you while you're waiting, and then you've got another guy who was a number 1 draft pick in the NFL draft about a decade ago, also there as a backup. And if it has to take longer than 1 year for Dart to be ready to start, Giants are now set up with a pretty nice quarterback room all of a sudden.
Absolutely. It's very interesting because I do think most analysts will tell you that because of the offense that he played in, because he's only 21 years old, because he has barely ever played under center, there's going to be a learning curve for Jackson Dart. There's going to be an adjustment. And I look at it like this is a good situation because Jackson Dart's not going to need to play unless, if things go south and they play Jackson Dart a little bit at the end of the season, that's fine. But otherwise, he can redshirt, he can learn, he can adjust to the NFL. I think it's a really good situation for Dart. You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Not that, I mean, you can't. I don't want to compare anyone to Patrick Mahomes, okay, as a player, but But the situation that Patrick Mahomes got drafted into is the point that I wanted to make. And they already had Alex Smith there, and they let Patrick Mahomes, even though he was the number 10, I think it was, pick in the draft, they let him just sit, and he never saw the field until the very last game of the season when Kansas City had already clinched a playoff spot, and the last game was meaningless. Then they let Patrick Mahomes start the final game, regular season game of the season, just to get his feet wet in the NFL, and they didn't actually make him the starting back and quarterback until year two. Again, I'm not saying that Jackson Dart's going to be Patrick Mahomes at all, but I'm just saying it's an example of a team drafting what they thought was their future quarterback and keeping the quarterback off the field basically all season. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen to Jackson Dart. I think that you will not see him on this field until very, very late in the season, if at all.
I'm curious, Tony, because you said that Jackson Dart wasn't your guy, and I think the Dart pick, the Dart pick has kind of drawn some mixed reaction. If you were going to make that move, who's the quarterback that you would have gone and gotten?
If I was going to make the move, the guy that I would have taken is Jalen Milroe, and he's a more raw prospect than Jackson Dart is, but I feel that his potential is just off the charts. And somebody said that Jalen Milroe reminds them of Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming. That might have been Dan Schneier who pods with Nick. I can't remember, but I guess my questions about Jackson Dart, and this is where my lack of knowledge about quarterback development comes in, is how much can you teach a guy the parts of the game that he does not already know or does not already do well. And for Jackson Dart, as you mentioned, he's rarely operated from under center. He's done a ton of play action. I think they ran play action on more than 50% of their plays, which is, I think, much more than anybody in the NFL does with play action. But maybe of more concern, I mean, that is the type of thing I can imagine you might be able to get used to. But the things that concern me are, can he get past his first read on a regular basis? And I think the quote unquote book on Jackson Dart was that when his first read wasn't there, he panicked a little bit, brought his eyes down, looked to just dump off the ball or looked to scramble, and didn't have the patience to get through read progressions. Yet that skill, being able to get through read progressions, I think is one of the most important things a quarterback has to have. And so can they teach him, train him to do more of that at a pro level, hopefully where they'll have an offensive line that gives the quarterback enough time to throw, that the quarterback's not skittish. So there's things like that I don't know. Can you teach that, or is that either something you have or you don't have?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because the offense that Dart was in didn't really require a lot of, I've got to find my third read. And I think there's examples of him doing it, but can he do it, on a full field progression level and all of that? We'll find out. I have to trust Brian Daboll. He's seen a lot of quarterbacks. He knows this a lot better than I do. You have to trust Brian Daboll and see how it goes. I mean, fingers crossed, to be honest with you, fingers crossed that 2025 goes well enough for the Giants that ownership doesn't end up putting Jackson Dart in the Daniel Jones, constant turnover of coaching staff and front office sort of spin cycle, because that is not helpful for a young quarterback at all. So fingers crossed that that the season works out and that this regime gets a chance to get Jackson Dart on the field in 2026 and see where it goes.
Yeah, and this is where I think having two established veteran quarterbacks on the team makes it easier to just let Jackson Dart sit for the entire season. Again, unless you want to get him into games late in the year just to get his feet wet on an NFL field and so on like that. I thought, going back to the last major quarterback draft that the Giants performed, I thought it was a mistake for the Giants to put Eli Manning on the field as quickly as they did. And I thought that was a little bit of a I don't know, a panic move maybe, because the Giants got off to a good start with Kurt Warner, and then they lost a few in a row and they were getting impatient. And I don't know whether Coughlin was worried about his job security or anything like that, but for whatever reason they stuck Eli in, and I didn't think Eli was ready to see the field when they got him into the game. And thank God he won that one game against Dallas on the very last week of the season, on the very last drive of the season, to give him some good memory going into the offseason. But I thought they rushed him onto the field, and I do not want to see that happen with Jackson Dart. I think they have to stick with Russell Wilson, and if necessary, James Winston for the season. Then maybe you give Jackson Dart a baptism at the very end of the year if you've got a throwaway game.
Absolutely. Are you surprised at all by the fact that Shedeur Sanders didn't get taken in the first round?
I'm a little bit surprised. I'm not shocked. I really expected that Pittsburgh was going to make the move at number 21, I believe they were sitting at. And when that didn't happen, I think that's when I and probably everybody else started thinking, gee, is anybody going to take Sanders in round one? And naturally, the thing about a quarterback is, well, it's true of any player, but people, I think, especially think about this in regard to quarterback, is that there's a huge difference taking Shedeur Sanders number 32 and number 33, because if you take him at 32, then you have the fifth-year option, and if you take him at 33, then you don't. So I guess Cleveland is up first, right? In round two, and
right.
I guess I could imagine them doing that. But if they thought they were going to do that at 33, then wouldn't they have tried to trade back into the first round so that you get that fifth-year option, which was what the Baltimore Ravens did back in 2018 with Lamar Jackson? Baltimore had actually used their number 25 pick on a tight end, Hayden Hurst, when they were looking for a quarterback to be the successor to Joe Flacco. And yet they didn't use the number 25 pick on Lamar Jackson. They waited until after they'd made that pick and then traded back into the first round to number 32 and took Lamar Jackson then. So yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that nobody went for him in the first round just because of that fifth-year option question.
Yeah, I did agree. I do agree with you that, once it hit Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh didn't take him, I kind of knew he wasn't going to make it. He wasn't going to get selected in the first round. Thought it was interesting that Joe Shane said last night, and I'm sure he had conversations with all of these teams prior to last night, but he said it was when Pittsburgh didn't take Shedeur that he really jumped into action, making calls. He started with 22 and he just went down the list until somebody said yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was interesting that that's when he really started to think about, trading up to get Dart. I think that's when he thought the price was realistic, because he didn't want to give up. He was clear last to give up 65.
Yeah, and of course, if you're an NFL team and you see the Los Angeles Rams lurking late in the first round, you always know you have a potential trade out of the first round partner, because Les Snead loves to trade out of the first round. And,
yes, he does, and And I'm sure that Joe was a little bit leery of New Orleans because there was a lot of chatter about New Orleans moving up for Dart as well. So I give Joe credit for reading the board properly. We have no idea how Jackson Dart is going to work out as an NFL quarterback, but I give Joe credit. He took a lot of abuse over the last couple of off seasons for Daniel Jones and for the way things looked on Hard Knocks last year after, with the Barkley situation and all of that. And and I give Joe a lot of credit for how he handled night one, for how he read the board and how he did what he did.
Yeah, and I'll say two things in response to that and your previous comment is that I agree he read the board well, and you know I really wish that we were having Giants Hard Knocks this year instead, because I would love to see what the conversations were like about quarterbacks. Okay, and and the other thing is that for all the fanaticism about drafting a quarterback, it interested me that after Cam Ward, no one came off the board, even though, as you said, you had teams like New Orleans that are looking for a quarterback and so on. And so there is still, despite the obsession with quarterbacks in the NFL, there is still some level of sanity about how much you should pay for a quarterback. And that's actually a little different the way things had gotten the last couple of years, because you had Zach Wilson a few years ago going number 2, and Trey Lance going number 3 in the 2021 draft. You had Anthony Richardson going number 4 in the draft a couple of years ago, and so we had gotten to a point where it seemed like any quarterback with potential was somebody who was going to go in the top 10 or close to the top 10. And so this year that stopped. Okay, and it wasn't like 2022, where I think 2022 people thought there just aren't any good quarterbacks in this draft. In this draft, I think people thought there are a lot of question marks about all the quarterbacks, and that's why people were waiting. So what Shane did, I believe, was playing things correctly. I mean, in the end, it's easy to say that because he got the quarterback that apparently he wanted to get. And then the other thing was, he didn't give up too much in order to do it. The assets he gave up. I mean, it pains me to not have that number 34 pick, and it pains me not to have that number 99 pick. Never mind the 3rd pick next year. So it's not like he gave up nothing, but he didn't give up a future first rounder, for example, to do that.
Right. And what it comes down to is the thing that Brandon Beane said years ago, when I think he made 2 trades up to get Josh Allen. He gave up a lot of assets, moved around a lot. And I've said this before, but what Beane said was, if you get it right, nobody's going to care what you gave up. If you get it right, then Josh Allen is an MVP. He's one of the best 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the league. I don't think there's a Bills fan out there who cares what players or what draft picks, Brandon Beane gave up. And, in the end, if the Giants are right about Jackson Dart, nobody's going to care about that 99th pick. Nobody. It'd be nice to have that pick and get a good player, but in the end, getting the right quarterback, and the Giants haven't had the right quarterback since the best days of Eli Manning. So, it's been a long time, and they're not easy to find, and odds are, as we know, because I've posted the success rates in each level of the draft. I've studied it, going back to 2010, and posted it, at Big Blue View each of the last 2 years. Odds are, it's probably not going to be the right pick. Odds are, Jackson Dart won't be what the Giants hope he will be. But at some point you have to try. And if he is what they think he could be, nobody's going to care what they gave up. Nobody's going to care that they only had one pick on day 2 of the draft. So that's what it comes down to, is whether they end up being right in the long term.
Yeah. And
if they're wrong, they're going to get fired anyway.
That's right. And in the end, regardless of what they gave up, they got a potentially great player with the number 3 pick. And
absolutely.
So, I think you're looking now at a Giants team that is really starting to fill out. And obviously they need Jackson Dart to work out in order for that to be the case, because if you don't have the quarterback, you don't have anything. Okay. But from a team that a few months ago people were talking about so many holes on the team, I didn't really think that was correct to begin with, but there were a lot of people saying that the Giants had so many holes to fill. But I think we're standing here this morning and I don't see that many holes to fill anymore if Dart becomes your quarterback. And if he doesn't, you still have 2 good veteran quarterbacks to lead the team this year, right? And so I think the Giants are kind of sneaky, looking like a pretty solid team. And we still have 2 days to go to improve that.
Yeah, it's I believe, national draft analysts look at the Giants 3-14 last year and they say, oh, the roster's terrible. And and all of that. And I honestly think that, Joe signed a lot of players in free agency. Javon Holland's a really good player. Paulson Adebo is a really good player. He signed a lot of, mid-level type, defensive line type guys. He added a lot of depth to this roster. And as he said last night, he made the point that he said, it feels like we're starting to fill out a little bit. And, and that's a good thing. I think the roster is better than a lot of people give it credit for. It still needs work. It needs more game changers. That's why I was so happy about getting Abdul Carter, because it adds a potential game changer. And I always say, NFL teams have to have game changers to win, because so many times it comes down to, these games come down to 4 or 5 plays. You need to have the players that can make those 4 or 5 difference-making, game-changing plays. And that's, Abdul Carter can be that. And hopefully Jackson Dart, a couple of years down the road, will be that as well.
Yeah. And you look at that defense now, and with them picking up Kayvon Thibodeau's 5th-year option, they've got a really solid front. Again, I still think they want to add a defensive tackle, or they should want to add a defensive tackle. To me, that's the finishing piece. And if they can do that with the number 65 pick, or tomorrow with the number 105, I guess, pick is their next one after that. If they can get a defensive tackle there to plug the middle a little bit and maybe give you a little pass rush along the way, then all of a sudden they're looking like a pretty impressive defense, and a pretty impressive defensive front, in particular with the signing of Chauncey Golston over the winter, and now adding Carter. You've got lots of options for going after the passer from that line. You aren't going to have to play your defensive players to exhaustion the way they were doing part of last year. I mean, guys like Burns and Thibodeau were on the field more than edge defenders should be on the field, and now they can really have a true rotation. Abdul Carter gives you like a little bit of a chess piece that you can move around if you want to play him that way. I mean, I think he should primarily be the guy who's rotating with Thibodeau and Burns. But if you want to play him a little bit at off-ball linebacker as well, then you can mix them in, that way. And so it's giving your defense options that you didn't have before. And so I think you can interpret last season as 3-14 being first and foremost the absence of good quarterback play, because the 1 week they got good quarterback play, or the few weeks they got good quarterback play were the games that they won, right? Obviously, the Indianapolis game, the Seattle game, which was Daniel Jones' best game of the season, I thought. And those are the games that they wound up winning. And in most of their games last season, they were within striking distance of winning the game. The defense was mostly keeping them in the game, and they just could not score on the other side of the field. And so, if you can change that, and I don't know how soon that's going to change. It's got to change a little bit for the better with Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston. But if you can change that in the long term with Jackson Dart for the better, then you see the path to them really becoming a contender.
Absolutely. Tony, I'm fascinated by something here. Everybody does their day 2 mock drafts and who's going to do what on day 2. And the reality of it is the Giants only have the 65th pick, and who knows? But I'm fascinated by something. I subscribe to Todd McShay's newsletter, and he just posted his second round mini mock. And you get to the New Orleans Saints, and this is off the beaten path of talking about the Giants, but I'm fascinated by this. The New Orleans Saints, number 40, McShay has them taking a quarterback, but he has them again passing on Shedeur Sanders. He has them taking Tyler Shuck. And I am just fascinated by how far Shedeur Sanders could fall tonight.
Yeah.
After falling out of round 1, I'm just fascinated by that after them thinking a few months ago that, well, I only have to visit with the first 3 or 4 teams because that's where we're going in the draft. And now it might be the back half of round 2. I'm just fascinated by that. It's amazing. And I mean, I know it has nothing to do with the Giants at this point and what we're talking about, but I just had to mention that. It's mind-boggling that, if that kind of a free fall continues for him.
Yeah, and
so
I wonder how much of it has to do with on the field stuff. I mean, there are on the field things you can criticize about Shedeur Sanders. I think his reaction to pressure was not always the best reaction. Always kind of cycling back and taking big losses and stuff like that. And but of course he was doing it behind a terrible offensive line. But I just wonder, how much it's the off the field stuff, and people didn't want to deal with what they perceived as headaches off the field. I mean, who knows? It does surprise. Well, first of all, we may not really be surprised. All right, you have Cleveland right off the bat, and they can certainly use a quarterback, and they might end things right away and just take him at number 33, and then we'll be done with it. And there are certainly plenty of other teams in the league who don't have what you'd consider a potential contending quarterback, even if they've got one right now who's okay. And at some point, one of those teams has to say, "Look, this guy has talent." I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Somebody threw all those balls to Travis Hunter that got Travis Hunter drafted number 2 in the draft, right? Okay, and so
absolutely,
some team I think is just going to say, "Look, I think it's time to move. He's really cheap here, and nobody's going to mind if a second round draft pick at quarterback doesn't work out, and the potential is there for him to work out, spectacularly on a team." So. I'm kind of doubt that he's going to fall much further. I think he's going to go within the first 10 picks tonight.
We shall see. Tony, it's going to be a long wait for Giants fans tonight, all the way to 65. The only good thing about that for me is have to go to my grandson's Little League game at 6:00. So, and I might actually be able to stay for the end for the entire game instead of running out of there after 2 innings. So we'll see. That's
unless
that's a little personal benefit.
Traded up.
In which case you and Chris are on your own. Because at that point I'll be committed. It'll be too late. I won't have the laptop. It'll be too late. You guys are on your own. Anyway, folks, if you there were, believe it or not, there were more than 20 stories posted about the NFL draft yesterday at Big Blue View, and we've been cranking away already this morning. Tony's got a best day 2 players available. We've got lots of analysis and review of what was done on day 1. We'll have predictions throughout the day and draft grades and all of that for you. So keep coming back to Big Blue View for all of your Giants draft coverage. And as always, thank you for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.